So without any more ado, I'm going to ask Nicholas Taylor if he would like to start the formalities this evening.
Thank you, David. I mean, it gives me very great pleasure to welcome and introduce Rabbi Raanan Mallek, who is joining us from Shorashim in northern Galilee, which cannot be far from the route that Jesus and his disciples took, as we read in the Gospels of Matthew and Mark, when they made their journey to the districts of Tyre and Sidon, where they were confronted by a woman variously described as Syrophoenician or Canaanite, who challenged very directly the presumption that God's blessings were reserved for the nation of Israel. It is precisely with the relationship between Israel and others that Rabbi Mallek has concerned himself very profoundly over a good number of years. His approach is not that of secular Jewish intellectuals like Albert Einstein and Noam Chomsky, or even the profoundly theistic humanism of Martin Buber, but comes from deeply within the rabbinic tradition. He stands in the Masorti tradition, which also known as conservative, not to be confused with about running the country for the benefit of the rich and powerful, but to do with how inherited traditions are received and interpreted and applied in new situations. And I hope that when he is able to make a visit to us in the flesh, that we will be able to learn more about the rabbinic method of interpreting the tradition and applying it, a much neglected area in our own formation in Western scholarship. But today he will be speaking to us about interfaith relations, in which he has invested a great deal, particularly in a land which is particularly fraught with tensions. He has written extensively about this. He has been involved in educating members of other faiths in the ways of Judaism, and he has contributed a great deal to building understanding in a place of great conflict. He is respected on both sides of the separation barrier as an icon, graffiti icon of him depicts. Unfortunately, I was not able to obtain a picture of that, but I still hope to. But Rabbi Raanan Mallek has a great deal to teach us about how interfaith relations can be forged and be used to build peace between people of different cultures. And we look forward very much to what you have to share with us this evening. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Nicholas, and as well to David. I will be muting everyone. You do have the option to unmute yourself. And thus we will begin. It truly is an honor for me to be able to be here with all of you and to present on the topic. I will be sharing my screen at this time. So hopefully everyone can now see the screen. We will begin with looking at the Holy Land itself and seeing just how important it is to realize that when looking from above, there isn't lines that demarcate between peoples. Throughout the land that you see, there are many, many different types of people. What you also will see here is the logo of the new Spirit of the Galilee, which is the nonprofit foundation that I'm currently running with the local municipal reform rabbi, as I am the local municipal Masorti, traditional or conservative rabbi. I will begin with the work that I have been doing with the World Council of Churches. they have been instrumental in my education of the situation in Palestine. I began this work in 2018 as a representative of the Board of Directors for Rabbis for Human Rights, and immediately saw that there was a necessity to bring a rabbinic presence alongside the YAPI ecumenical accompagners of the WCC program, and walk with them in solidarity so that they would not feel threatened by the Jewish community in Hebron. And it went very, very well. I was able to walk Palestinian school children from their homes to their school, as well as sitting with Palestinians who immediately, it was clear to me, were being abused verbally. And I learned their stories sitting at their stalls that faced the settlements in the area. And people had not seen rabbis sitting with these Palestinian store owners previously. It was a new sight to them. And our conversation very quickly became about how deep the knowledge is of the Palestinian community about Judaism. And I was being asked questions about why we were not treating the stranger in our midst in the way that the Torah was telling us to. And my replies were almost non-existent. I was there to listen and also to give support, because the interpretations, as I was hearing from the Palestinian that I was speaking with, that you see in this picture, was exactly along the lines of what I wrote in my thesis, which I published and we'll talk about in a bit. And I was deeply impressed by the textual interpretation that, in his mind, needs to lead in a different direction from the fundamentalism that he sees every single day in Hebron, as represented by the Jewish people. And we talked about how to change that towards fostering a dialogue towards justice and peace. I, after this time, was brought into a cohort of amazing Palestinians, Christians, Jews, Jewish Israelis, 12 Faces of Hope, who 50 years after the beginning of the official beginning of the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, we are seen as a possible alternative voice to the dialogue that is mostly heard. I'll speak a bit towards this in the video that you are about to hear.
Albert Einstein greatly inspired me when he said that you cannot deal with a problem with the same conditions that created that problem. So I think that we need to delve deeply into understanding what are those conditions that created the problem between the Israelis and the Palestinians, but also be able to transcend that and to look towards what are other possibilities that we haven't thought of. What gives me hope is that the new generation of Palestinians and Israelis are able to exit that box of normal thinking and are able to think of how we can both thrive on this land together. I'm currently working with an organization called Hands of Peace as a facilitator. And within the realm of my facilitation, I'm learning from both sides, from the Israeli side in where the children of my people are at, who are wanting and desiring peace in the midst of the conflict, and also learning about the Palestinian side and what they want and how they're feeling. And I think that a joint sense of humanity, which it opens up within the midst of these facilitations, creates in essence the empathetic imperative on both sides. And this in essence is the fire of hope. This is what fuels it, so that we can look beyond the conditions that created the reality in which some people live amazingly, such as where we are right now in Zichron Yaakov, whereas others will live in abject poverty and destitution, such as in Tubas and the refugee camps in Aida, in Bethlehem. And I think that part of what can bring about change is taking people that live really well and bringing them to see what is not so far. It's not across the border in Damascus, in the middle of Syria. It's in their same country, in their same land. This disparity, it needs to end because it's fueling a sense of resentment, a sense of hatred. And if we work together, Palestinians and Israelis, we will be able to change this situation.
All right, thank you. I'm just going to exit the video. 1 second. Seems like there is a problem exiting. Oh, there we are. So back to the experiences with YAPI on behalf of the World Council of Churches. It was very, very meaningful to be chosen among my fellow scholars and partners in the work. And I would like to give a personal shout out to Rabbi Noam Mazor, who has joined us this evening. Welcome. During this time, a bit before my ordination, I was given a special ordination, a peace-building ordination by all three Abrahamic faiths. And a video of that ordination helps explain a lot behind what it means and the work that we were doing.
People say those Jews and Arabs, Israelis and Palestinians, they hate each other. They're killing each other. They'll never live together in peace. My name is Eliyahu McLean, Rodef Shalom. That means a Jewish peacemaker. And I'm active as a peace leader in interfaith dialogue and peacemaking projects. I organize monthly cross-border events to bring Israelis and Palestinians together. For example, once a month, we have a prayer gathering in Jerusalem. Jews, Christians, and Muslims praying side by side for interfaith cooperation and understanding. Today, you witnessed an event in the Old City where I blessed a friend of mine named Raanan and ordained him as a Jewish peacemaker, as a Rodef Shalom. And what was very special about that moment is that we had myself, a religious Jew, a religious Muslim, and a religious Christian, each empowering and blessing and continuing this chain of Jewish peacemaking and Jewish peacemakers. One of the challenges in the Israeli societies, there's sometimes skepticism and cynicism that peace is not possible. But I learned from one of my rabbis, azut de kedusha, we say in Hebrew, to believe that peace is possible. And he said, don't just look at the world with all the problems there. You should put your glasses on. We Israeli Jews also carry a trauma of 2,000 years of persecution, even after we established sovereignty and political control. And we didn't learn the lesson of how to treat our neighbor. And one of the principles of the Torah that inspires me is to love the stranger, for you yourselves were strangers in the land of Egypt. Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha, love your neighbor as your brother. But are we not all one family? Yes, we are, but we just happen to be a slightly dysfunctional family that needs healing. Jerusalem is the heart of the world, and if the heart is ill and aching, the whole world will feel the negative effects of our broken heart. Our job as peacemakers is to build a bridge to unite the heavenly and earthly Jerusalem. If there can be peace in Jerusalem, there can be peace in the world. As I say this, the rain is pouring on Jerusalem. A blessing, because in this part of the world, we need every single drop. Shalom Aleichem. Salamu Alaikum.
So that was the explanation by my teacher of Jewish peacebuilding, Eliyahu McLean, who I have been blessed with partnering and working hard over the past couple years in bringing together all of the different peoples of this broken land. Here is the ordination itself that was signed that evening. In addition, I focused during my studies and afterwards on how the status of the stranger that you heard about, the ger, specifically what is called a ger toshav, or a resident stranger, can in a way be helpful to guiding Judaism to becoming a religion dedicated to equal rights and justice for all the inhabitants of the land. The ordination as a dayan was in the tradition of Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi, may his memory be for a blessing. He was also very well known in the world of peace building, as you can see him with the Dalai Lama, as well as the many times that he danced throughout different lands with all of the different religions to show that communication and love of the other is possible. The publication that resulted from my thesis at the Schachter Rabbinical Seminary was published by Brill in a volume called Jews in Dialogue. I was very honored, especially because the teacher of my teachers, Rav Heschel, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, is seen marching here with Martin Luther King, which was the photo that was chosen for the front of the volume. And I open the volume and discuss the historical developments of the term of the ger toshav and how that affects Jewish law, which is called halacha, as well as how these Jewish legal guidelines can help bring about a religious understanding for the necessity of democracy in the state of Israel. Expression of this has been seen as well in the work that has been done by my teacher, Rabbi Sir David Rosen, who recently was hosted at the palace of Salman, the king of Saudi Arabia. And he was the first Jewish rabbi in the history to meet the king in his official residence. And that is something that could not have been done had the interreligious work not taken place beforehand. So now we get to the point of talking about how interreligious dialogue can be helpful in peace building, specifically in the area of diplomacy. When we think of diplomacy, most of us imagine diplomats, and that is very important work. And track one diplomacy is at very much the core of how ceasefires and Oslo peace agreements and peace talks came about. Many people have a critical view of what took place after Oslo, because track 2 and 3 were not necessarily paid attention to. So what is meant by track 2? Well, track 2 is where professionals are able to get together, whether they are doctors, cooks, however they may be, whatever profession they may be, and this includes the religious officials of both peoples, to be in dialogue, and we'll focus on track 2. At the same time, track 3 is vitally important, people-to-people diplomacy undertaken by individuals, much of what you saw in Praying Together in Jerusalem, where we bring together Muslims, Christians, and Jews to pray in the Old City for peace once a month, is track 3 diplomacy. It's interreligious activism. So we'll focus a bit more on the track 2 diplomacy. Track 2 diplomacy is unofficial, non-structured interaction. It's always open-minded, often altruistic, and strategically optimistic, based on best-case analysis. Its underlying assumption is that actual or potential conflict can be resolved or eased by appealing to common human capabilities to respond to goodwill and reasonableness. Scientific and cultural exchanges are examples of track 2 diplomacy. The problem most political liberals fail to recognize is that reasonable and altruistic interaction with foreign countries cannot be an alternative to traditional track 1 diplomacy, with its official posturing and its underlying threat of the use of force. Both tracks are necessary for psychological reasons, and both need each other. In 1996, Dr. Louise Diamond and John MacDonald published Multi-Track Diplomacy, a systems-based approach to peace. Since then, the model has been more robustly developed, and the original second track has been expanded into 9 tracks: peacemaking through diplomacy, conflict resolution, commerce, personal involvement, learning advocacy, religion, funding, and information. All of these need to be in place for there to be a true development of peace between peoples. So we have some essential questions before us. The first is, how can different religious traditions of resolving conflict, such as sulh in the Arab culture, primarily in the Islamic tradition, and tshuva in the Jewish tradition, be helpful to track 2 diplomacy? Sulh and tshuva are very similar. Sulh, reconciliation, is widely practiced even today within Palestinian society. And tshuva for religious Jews is something that is part of our lives on a daily basis, to be a religious Jew from any of the denominations. There are Western lay politicians who use religious language to legitimize political warfare in the Middle East. We know this very clearly by political developments that we see on the news. How can we take a stand against this phenomenon? What process can religious leaders have in helping to start a new civilizational conversation focused on a shared society? I'd also like to give a definition of interreligious dialogue before we proceed. Interreligious dialogue is a non-violent exchange process between adherents of different religions concerning matters related to religion. Religion is the field of social acts, symbols, ideas, and institutions that are tying human behavior to transcendental powers. I would like to emphasize in saying this definition that although it's nonviolent, it doesn't mean that there isn't conflict. Interreligious dialogue can handle conflict, and conflict in many ways is part of what transpires in some of the most honest and authentic interreligious dialogue that takes place. Interreligious dialogue has become a flourishing and multifaceted industry among all kinds of religious actors, clerics, and committed lay leaders, religious bodies and individual believers, religious leaders, and grassroots activists, many of whom feel called to contribute to political and social peacemaking, mutual understanding, healing, reconciliation, and justice. So interest in the faith-based diplomacy rose in the 1980s and 90s. It's something that has been incorporated in numerous different places in the world. In South Africa, it was seen as a vitally important part of the process for truth and reconciliation. I won't go into the details here because I'd like to get more into how this translates into our current environment. In my work at the Tantur Ecumenical Institute, I had the pleasure of working with incredible Palestinian lawyers and negotiators who remembered that Tantur was a place of dialogue from the earliest times in the 1990s, when dialogue was seen as impossible, throughout Oslo and even into the intifadas and into the different operations that took place. Tantur was seen as a place where dialogue could happen. And for those who may not know of the Institute, it lies right out of the entrance to Bethlehem, still within the municipality as it's currently claimed of Jerusalem. Our two tribes not only have separate and different narratives, but we also have separate and conflicting ideologies, Jonathan Kutab says. We cannot find a way to live together if we continue to hang on to the two ideologies that we started with. We must find a new idea that is worth working towards and change our ideologies in such a way that acknowledges the other as part of us, as who we want to be. It's a tall order, I know, but you really must move away from what I call the false view of democracy, which says that if I have 51% of the population, I can totally destroy, negate, crush, delegitimize, disenfranchise the other. That's not democracy. The tyranny of 51% simply does not work. I would like to take a moment to think deeply about how democracy is identified and how it's defined. If you count the amount of human beings in the entirety of the Holy Land, many people don't know that there currently are as many Jews as non-Jews within the Holy Land. If you include the Golan Heights, if you include the West Bank, if you include Gaza and the state of Israel, if you include that entire area, there is the exact same amount of Jews and non-Jews. What should that mean if we are to define democracy as it should be defined? That being said, what does that mean in light of the gerrymandering, and there's no other way of calling it, that took place as a result of 1967 and then Oslo, of saying this is a way to ensure politically a Jewish majority? And I think that that's been a stated outcome of the Zionist endeavor from the earliest of years, and it continues to be today, that a Jewish majority is needed for the safety of the Jewish people. That is an equation that is taken for granted among Israeli Jews as a majority. And what can be done to redefine how we look at democracy as a concept in the Holy Land is something that I'm passionate about. And this takes us to a way forward. I think that in a way we must understand that there are great thinkers and minds that have come before us that looked at the situation in a different way than the reality that we are forced to look at today. One of these geniuses upon whose shoulders I sit is Martin Buber, who truly understood what the Torah was referring to when in Leviticus 25:23 it says, "And the land shall not be sold in perpetuity, for the land is mine, for you are strangers and temporary residents with me." The Holy Land is not intended to solely belong to any human being, whether they are Jewish, Christian, or Muslim. All the inhabitants have responsibilities while residing in the Holy Land. The mandate to act for peace is clear to Martin Buber, to Rabbi Menachem Froman, and forms the basis for their vision of a shared land. Now, Martin Buber had this concept before the founding of the State of Israel. And whether it could actually come about is a question that may be in the realm of would've, could've, should've, and doesn't help us when looking back at 1948. But perhaps it can help us today. Much of his thinking came from 200 years of political thought, of federalism. And if we take a moment and look at the word federal and where it comes from the French, fédéral, from the Latin stem feudo, or foedis, which means covenant, league, treaty, or alliance, we come to a word that is understood in the Semitic context, which is brit, or covenant. It's understood within Arab culture, it's understood within Jewish culture, this idea of making covenants between people. Abraham did it, Isaac, Jacob, all of our forefathers, and it was done as a way to encourage statecraft. I'd maybe even go one step forward and to say soulcraft, because people were able to connect on a soul-based level to decide what a shared society should look like by establishing covenants that could last for generations. Let's take a look at what this could possibly look like.
For over 20 years, Israelis and Palestinians For over 20 years, Israelis and Palestinians have been trying to make peace by way of separation. Us here and them there, a divorce. But separation to two states has not worked. Both Israelis and Palestinians are deeply connected to all the land. Jews call it Israel, and Arabs call it Palestine. Most of the holiest sites for the Jews are in the West Bank. This is why hundreds of thousands of settlers have been attracted to there. At the same time, the Palestinian refugees from 1948 are connected to the villages and towns of their homeland that existed, and some still exist, within Israel. For years, we have been ignoring the attachment that both peoples have to the entire land. This is why we have been focusing on separation. The West Bank was carved into areas A, B, and C. A separation barrier was erected, settlements were uprooted. Separation was highly divisive for Israelis and came at a very high price for Palestinians. It is quite clear that there are two national movements deeply rooted in the same territory. After 20 years of failed attempts at partition, it is time to accept reality. As the two territories are so deeply entangled, it should really come as no surprise that separation has failed. We need to take a different approach and speak of two states in one space, an Israeli-Palestinian union. Two states, because just like Israelis need a nation-state with a flag, a parliament, and a national anthem, so do the Palestinians, a flag, a parliament, an anthem. They too have been struggling for independence for over a century, and it is clear that sooner or later a Palestinian state will be established on 22% of historical Palestine. But roads, railways, water, and energy infrastructure can be shared. It is even economical, and in certain respects, it has been happening for years. In fact, Israelis and Palestinians already share a currency. Most importantly, Israelis and Palestinians will enjoy freedom of movement and access throughout the land. The principle of freedom of movement and access will enable settlers to avoid eviction and remain in Palestine as residents of Palestine and citizens of Israel. Likewise, Israel will accept refugees as residents of Israel, but voting citizens of Palestine. Is this far-fetched? Is it impossible to imagine, some years down the road, Israelis and Palestinians moving freely throughout both countries? Like in Europe, We should consider developing cooperation between Israel and Palestine in the fields of governance, security, infrastructure, and economy, so that one day in the future we will see the establishment of an Israeli-Palestinian Union. During this past year, IPCRI, together with a group of Palestinians and Israelis, has researched and developed this framework. We invite you to read our report and decide for yourself. Thank you.
And this can be seen on their website of IPCRI that can be looked up. And I'm happy to share links about that afterwards. This is a creative initiative that had its founding and start at Tantur. And Tantur as an ecumenical and interfaith place has, again, been very instrumental in my work and the interreligious world as a whole. How can we practically see this come about? That is also an important part of looking forward. And I've broken this down into 3 different stages. The first stage is where we come together as a People's Congress to write federal papers with a dedicated leadership among Palestinians and Israelis. This will allow for slow political change to take place in both the Knesset and the Palestinian Legislative Council. There should also be an establishment of the Holy Land Federal Peacekeeping Corps that provides an alternative to IDF and having to mandate that Israeli teens upon the age of 18 are forced into the army. And this could give an alternative to that, as well as providing for those that would think of joining the Palestinian National Security Forces, that they could instead join a peacekeeping force. It focuses on de-escalating conflicts between both peoples. There would be Federalist educational programs across all ages, mandatory dual language curriculum in Arabic and Hebrew in all Israeli schools, interreligious studies to learn about Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, and yes, even the establishment of elite leadership academies for training the future generation of the political and religious leadership. When I say elite, of course, I mean a meritocracy, those that are able to succeed and thrive and become leaders in both societies must be supported as such. To focus more in depth on why a federal peacekeeping corps is so necessary is that de-escalating conflict is something that is foundational for helping to change the reality around us. And we can do this in a proper method that has been established by the President of the United States, who appoints the Peace Corps director and a deputy director, and that could switch between the Palestinian and Israelis as they are appointed. The Congressional Committee on Federal Relations could be charged with general oversight of the activities and programs of the Peace Corps, as well as establishing their annual budget. And there be an act that ensures that a total budget of at least 1% of the military budget of both Israel and Palestine is dedicated to peace building, and this would be raised by 5% during each period until the establishment of the Federal Republic of the Holy Land, of the idea of 2 states in 1 space. How we're doing this practically is through local work. I had the benefit of taking on an amuta, or a foundation, that for many years, since the early 1990s, was focused on bringing together different sectors of the Israeli society in conversation and in relationship. Rabbi Mark Rosenstein, who is here on the call, was one of the leaders of this field, and I have learned much from him in bringing to the future the ideas of what pluralistic society could look like, not only between the Jews and Arabs, Israelis and Palestinians, but also among Jews themselves, where there is so much that needs to be done. The website is spiritofthegalilee.org.il, and everyone is of course welcome to take a look. All right, so another practical piece of the equation is the Wilderness Leadership Academy. Based on concepts such as the Green School in Bali, founded by John Hardy, in which ecology was at the center, Outward Bound, founded by Kurt Matthias Hahn, who his work with Outward Bound has been transformational in my own life. I went for 10 days to Croatia with 7 Israeli educators and 7 Palestinian educators, and we hiked the Velebit Mountains with backpacks on. And throughout the days, we had to be in conversation. We had to deal with who's cooking, what are we cooking, how do we leave time for prayer for those who it's important to have a prayerful place in their life. And this all turned into conversation over a period of 10 days, which was transformative for us. And I'm still very close with my Palestinian partners who I work with, some of whom are involved in the Wilderness Leadership Academy. I'm excited to say that Outward Bound will be working closely with us, and we'll be sending instructors for our initial treks. And I'm hoping that we will be successful as we emerge from Corona. Much of the focus that we are going to take at the very beginning is how can we emerge from a time of trauma, of emotional trauma, of being alone and secluded, into a more healthy society, to become better than what we were before. And we can all do that. It's definitely a possibility. And much of what we will seek to aspire towards in the Wilderness Leadership Academy is to help the next generation emerge from learning how to be leaders in nature to becoming very serious practitioners of conflict transformation as peacekeepers within the land. Having, as mediators, the ability to walk with a fellow Palestinian or fellow Israeli throughout the land and de-escalate conflict, whether it's during the olive harvest, whether it is at different places within Palestine that suffer on a regular basis, as well as in Israel, and how that can be changed and transformed truly is up to the people that are here. And that is what the Wilderness Leadership Academy will aspire towards helping to grow. The website of the Wilderness Leadership Academy is active. You can read more about what the Outward Bound instructor-led expeditions will be about and what we're going to look to do. It is very much an environmental concept. Now, I must mention that one of the most difficult challenges that is in front of us is the fact that we are going to try and tackle a problem. And this problem is that the Jewish National Fund, the JNF, known as Kakal in Israel, has a very problematic reputation internationally. Whether it's due to the Palestinian narrative, whether it's due to the news that people read about in East Jerusalem, and helping to transform that conflict on a micro scale is something that can affect the macro in a very substantial way. So this is where we would like to begin. Where we will end up is certainly a question, but our work will not be easy, especially since the location, the physical location that we were hoping to be able to work with is on Jewish National Fund land. But I'm hopeful. I'm certainly hopeful. Stage 2, that would begin in 2028, not too far away, about 8 years from now, is creating a binational constitution accepted by both the State of Israel and the State of Palestine, and creating binational state building programs that are activated, which focus on balancing the powers so as to decrease the asymmetrical nature of the conflict. Now, in mentioning the asymmetrical nature of the conflict, it is vitally important for me to say that throwing out these years for Israelis means one thing. It means living in a democracy. It means enjoying equal rights. Putting out a timeline like this of decades for the Palestinians is a completely different picture. It would mean that until there's change, they would be living under an occupation. They would be living under circumstances that any of us in our right mind would rise up and speak up against if we only knew what it means to have to wake up at 3 a.m. every morning and stand in lines that barely move and are most times turned around for an income that barely is able to support a family. This type of injustice must change, and it must change quickly. And yet, there needs to be a foundation for allowing this change to happen in a way that doesn't allow for violence to continue. The part that I see myself taking is specifically looking at how religion can be a way to transform the conflict for good, where religion is no longer used to divide, but instead to unite and create conversation. And I'm confident that that can happen. The end of the vision and the end of my presentation is that by 100 years of 1948, when it all started, that there would be a declaration of covenant for the Federal Republic of the Holy Land, where in essence, both peoples would get all that they're aspiring towards, where the whole land is the Holy Land. And yes, is there an area that is recognized as the State of Palestine? Yes, there is. Is there an area that's recognized as the State of Israel? Yes. Could they at one time become like Europe? Perhaps, but we're not in Europe. We're in a very different location in the Middle East that requires different tools and different ways of thinking about how to help end conflict. Thank you very much for your time tonight. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Rabbi Mallek. We can't actually applaud physically, but I'm quite sure that it is certainly happening throughout everybody here. And for myself, I'm deeply grateful for that very moving and hopeful and inspiring lecture to us, and I do thank you very, very warmly for it. We do have some time for questions and discussions, so I'd like to invite people who would like to contribute to speak and ask Rabbi Mallek what they wish.
And please be sure to unmute yourself.
Yes, please do unmute yourself. So. You can use the chat facility and we'll keep an eye open on that as well if that makes things easier. Otherwise, just raise your hand and I'll try and catch you. I can see most people. Yes, Stephen Ballard.
Thank you so much for that inspiring address, Rabbi, and all that you're doing for the cause of peace. You're certainly on the side of the angels, I think, in what you're doing. It's as long ago as 1975 now that I went to Israel, and I remember going up to the Golan Heights and seeing the UN troops there policing the area. Is that still the case now?
Yes, there is still a UN peacekeeping force that is in Sinai as well as in the Golan Heights, as well as on the border with Lebanon.
Thank you. The other question I have, it was very interesting to hear about the shared currency. How does that operate financially?
So it is an Israeli currency, and that needs to be made clear. But it is the currency that is used by the majority of Israelis and Palestinians, as well as the US dollar. And the euro has taken a prominent place and is used within the area. But the Israeli currency is accepted in both Palestine and in Israel. And investments are made in that currency. Banks function in that currency. And whether or not there will be a Palestinian currency and how integral that is in forming a nation is certainly a conversation that needs to be had. One of the federal gatherings that I had the benefit of being part of was thinking about creating a currency in which the flora and fauna of the Holy Land would appear on it. And that would be a way to help bring both sides together. Whether or not this currency will be tied to Bitcoin or gold or anything else are other ideas that are coming up, and there's a very dynamic conversation about how to create a stable economy for both peoples. And I'm excited to be part of it, to be honest.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Catherine. I see you raising your hand.
Hello, good evening.
Hello.
Thank you very much for the talk. It brought back memories. I'm hearing about the Golan Heights from the previous questioner. I remember as a child, the eldest of 4 children, being taken by my parents from a very small village in North Wales to Jerusalem. And it was the first time on an aeroplane, first time abroad. And when we arrived in Tel Aviv, it was the middle of the night. And we were boarding a bus, and we all had to cower under the seats till we arrived to our destination. And we heard gunfire. And it was just an incredible experience. When we were in Jerusalem, an Arab taxi driver looked after us. My father was going to a conference in the Knesset. My mother had 4 children, and we were taken all around the place. It was a very interesting experience. And here I am now. I can't tell you how many years later, but my hair is white. I'm in my 60s. I'm a member of the Scottish Episcopal Church, and I'm wondering what our role is in this work that you're doing as Scottish Episcopal Church members.
Thank you.
A very important question, and one that I would receive on a regular basis when I worked at Tantur. And my answer was always the same, that Christians are natural peace builders and peacemakers. You know, blessed be the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God, is a concept that Rabbi Yeshua, that Jesus brought to the world, but it is based on hundreds, thousands of years of Jewish tradition, of Aaron, the brother of Moses, being a peacemaker. And that tradition that you saw the video of the ordination is something that Christians naturally, I think, feel a connection towards when reading the Gospels and the message that Rabbi Yeshua brought to the world of how important it is to see one another as being made in the image of our common Father. So I do see Christians, whether they are in the land, whether they are outside of the land, as being bridges between Jews and Muslims, providing places, whether it's Tantur, whether it's Talith Hakumi in Beit Jalla, as places of meeting and gathering so that we can have the conversations that are needed to move us forward. And in that spirit, I'd like to segue to what Grant just asked. What are some initial steps that may be needed to develop the lesser inequality? And I would answer without any doubt that it's about getting to know one another. It's about bridging the divide between Tel Aviv and Bethlehem, and the Aida refugee camp, right? And there being exchanges where people see what's going on. The distance between Aida and Tel Aviv is not so far if you think in British terms. And people have no idea what's going on and why there's conflict and why the Palestinians keep on saying no. I would put the challenge before any race or religion of peoples on this earth to be hopeful under the type of circumstances that the population of the Aida refugee camp have to live in. And the empathetic imperative of knowing that we were once strangers in Egypt and that we must treat the stranger with equality and with fairness must be at the core of how we treat one another, and we're not there yet. So it's all about education. It's all about understanding practical ways forward to end the occupation and what that would look like, whether it's creating places of employment, whether it's doing the nation building that must be done for Palestine, to thrive in this land, not just exist, and be a sub-unit of the state of Israel. That's not what independence looks like. And I think that as Palestinians and Israelis coming together to be part of that joint process of Palestinian nation building could lead to incredible potential for this vision to grow and be our future.
Thank you. We have a question from Jerry Dillon, but first, Grant Barclay, would you like to have any follow-up to that with your question?
Thank you, Rabbi Mallek, for your quite inspiring but challenging talk. I suppose my question would be, in terms of the track one diplomacy and this whole business about inequality, do you think that some of the international steps which we read in our newspapers are currently being taken, which may arguably, and I know this is contentious, but they could arguably lead to some greater division rather than a move towards division, which I think you articulated? Do they run the risk of subverting the kind of partnerships which you envisage?
So the Abraham Accords, which is the formal name that has been given to the recent peace agreements, is exactly trying to use this language in order to create a new reality. Now, there are rumors about what this reality looks like in Israel-Palestine. We know from the track one diplomacy what this looks like between the UAE, between Bahrain, between Sudan and the state of Israel. But how this translates to Israel-Palestine is something that we must be aware of, that we must keep our eyes wide open, because part of the intention that the Trump administration had was replacing the Palestinian Authority with wealthy Palestinian business owners, billionaires and millionaires, who would create a more local / capitalist approach to business being the be-all and end-all of how to create a thriving future for both places. And in many ways, that vision, after so many years of deplorable occupation, looks very attractive to many Palestinians. Many Palestinians, if they can make do and send their kids to college and create a positive future, are at this point, after so many years of occupation, whether we say 50 or we recognize the truth of 70 plus years, or 100 years if you go back to the British times. It's something that that must be understood in depth. Is what are the psychological repercussions of a nation continuously being under occupation for generations on end, and how does that allow for change to take place where nonviolent resistance is seen as a necessity, and becomes part and parcel of the next process that we are going to go through, because there's no way that the occupation can be swept underneath the rug. Jewish organizations such as Rabbis for Human Rights, such as Combatants for Peace, and many others are taking the moral stand for the Palestinian people and saying there needs to be an end now to the occupation.
Thank you. We have 3 questions. We'll take Jerry Dillon first, then Ian Fulton and Bart McKettrick in that order. So Jerry, please, could I invite you to speak?
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi. I was just wondered, what do the statistics tell us about the people in Palestine and Israel? Are they in favor of a two-nation state?
Sadly, no. I think on both sides, they are committed to different visions of what a one-state solution would look like. I have a tendency to call the federal solution a zero-state solution. It's no longer putting the state at the center of what we need to be aspiring towards fixing. We need to be aspiring towards creating relationship and fixing things on a P2P or a people-to-people level. Track 2 and track 3, the foundations of which must be developed before track 1 can formally take hold. And so I hope that comes close to answering the question, because I can't speak for the Palestinian people, but I can speak for the Israelis, that when it comes down to it, the vision that's presented for a two-state solution is more of a delusion than a solution, in my mind.
Thank you. Ian Fulton, please. Could you unmute yourself?
Yes,
Ian, please?
Yes, thank you.
Sorry.
Shalom, Erev Tov, Raanan. May I say, as a secular Jew, for many years I can consider, I've always advocated that for a rapprochement between Jews and Palestinians in Israel. This has been going on for 70 or 80 years now, and they really ought by now to have been a solution to this particular issue. I have listened quite fascinated to the talk that you have given, Raanan, and I find it very difficult to find anything that I could not agree with in what you were advocating. The question, therefore, that I'm posing to you, and to some extent a previous speaker may have already hinted at that, given the current divergence between, shall we say, a Likud authority in Israel and that of their equivalent in Palestine with the PLA and Hamas, would it require some form of acceptable, honest broker to bring your concept together in terms of these disparate factions? And if so, who would that be?
I'll tell you a story. During one of the opportunities that I had to go to Amman, Jordan, for the United Religious Initiative gathering, I had what may have been one of the more emotional experiences that I've ever had. It was during a Shabbat, a Friday night, and we set up candles to be lit. And I would say an hour before candle lighting time, I was in conversation with a young man about my age. And we talked about life, and we talked about the conflicts. We talked about issues that were arising. And he left, and a Palestinian partner who I'd been working with, he came up to me and he said, "Do you know who that was?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, he is from the political department of Hamas." And I had some moments of breathing deeply and thinking to myself, and I approached him during the next gathering that we had, which was before Shabbat. And I said to him, I didn't understand that you were from Gaza. And he said, well, this is something that must be kept quiet, but yes, I am. And I have something that I'd like to ask you. And I said, yes. And he said, would you mind when you lit candles if my grandmother joined you? My grandmother, she's a refugee living here in Jordan. And she would like to join. And I said, of course she's welcome. And we stood by the candles during the lighting, and this grandmother looked at me and she said, could I have the matches? I said, of course you can. And I gave her the matches, and she lit the Shabbat candles. And she said a blessing that I couldn't tell you was in Hebrew or in Arabic. It may have been in Arabic. But she covered her eyes exactly as Jewish grandmothers and mothers do. And I remember asking her afterwards, and I said, what are you doing? Where did you get that? And she said, well, that's from my grandmother. I said, well, was your grandmother Jewish? And she said, well, we have a tradition that we come from the ancient Israelites. We've kept candle lighting for many years, but in all aspects, we are Muslim. She was wearing the Muslim garb and prayed the Muslim prayers, but kept a Jewish tradition. And at that moment, in a way, I saw through the divide. And I think that once we're able to see through the divide, the most unexpected of the different political peoples from both sides are going to become the greatest advocates for creating peace. We can't forget that Israel was instrumental in supporting Hamas from its early days to counter the PLO. They believed in the early days of Hamas that religion would even help moderate the Palestinian people. It didn't go in that direction for many different reasons, but we cannot forget the political past of where religion was seen as a possible way to break on through and be in conversation with the Palestinian people. This was taken to an apex by my teacher, Rabbi Menachem Froman, who during the Second Intifada walked from where he lived in a settlement to Gaza and met with the Palestinian Hamas leadership at a time where that was simply not done. But he did that to lead by example and to show that we must be in conversation. And he was. One conversation after the next will build, in my opinion, the possibility for helping to bring about a different future.
Thank you very much. I think this must be the last question. Bart McKettrick. Could you unmute yourself, please, Bart? Sorry, we can't hear you. Thank you. Okay.
Bart, are you with us? It may have.
Is that it? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Great. Fine. Thank you.
Again, thank you very much for an inspirational talk. One of the things, I'm involved with the university in Bethlehem. I chair the board of the International Board of Regents in the university in Bethlehem. And I understand that all significant social change has an educational pathway. And the more significant the change, the wider the pathway has to be. But that education is, in my view, not just, in fact, it's not about knowing more about things. It's about the relationships that we create. It's an education that is based on how we live together, how we understand the spirit of each other, and how we are able to transform society by relationships. I think your reference to Kurt Hahn is a very significant aspect. My own view is that Kurt Hahn's ideas need brought up to date, but basically they're very sound, but again based on relationships and transformation. And for me, the future has to depend on an understanding of the vision, the mission, and the values that we share together. For example, what kind of understanding do we have about justice? What kind of understanding do we have about hope? And what understanding do we have about love? For me, these are the critical bits, and these are not just philosophical ideas, they must be the lived experiences that you're talking about. And maybe sometime when I'm in Israel, we can talk about some of these and talk about what they mean in Bethlehem, in Palestine. But thank you for the inspiration this evening.
Of course, I'd like to just share a picture from the expedition to, now that you mentioned Kurt Hahn, the Outward Bound expedition that the Peacebuilding Palestinian and Israeli Emerging Leaders Program did. This is one of the pictures where we climbed to the top of a mountain. And so if we're speaking about the everyday and what that could potentially look like, this is a type of gathering that was instrumental, and this was only 10 days. So what could a continual program look like over many years that incorporates a peace building option? To me, it's encouraging, and I hope it's to others as well.
I'm sure it will be. Thank you.
Rabbi Mallek, could I thank you very, very warmly indeed. Your whole talk and this evening has been really centered around the idea of friendship, it seems to me, and I'm sure you've gained many friends here with your grace and courtesy in the old-fashioned sense of the word, by all that you've said and all that you're doing. But I think it would be appropriate then to ask your friend Nicholas to have one final last word to thank you for coming to be with us this evening. Nicholas.
Well, thank you ever so much for coming to join us. I'm sure we've all learned something. I'm sure there are issues we will continue to wrestle with. We look forward to your visiting us in the flesh before too long, and sharing more of your learning with us. And this is a reminder to everyone to brush up your Hebrew and Aramaic ahead of a session on the rabbinic approach to a tradition from which we also derive our origins. And we look forward to further opportunities of your sharing your learning, your pilgrimage with us, and we wish you every blessing in your continued and what I know is a very costly, often lonely walk to which you have been called in a land we all know revere as holy, where significant events have happened for all our faiths, and every blessing in your continued endeavors for peace and justice.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
For the invitation. I very much have been honored, and I'm thankful to the Diocese of Glasgow and Galloway. So thank you very, very much.
Well, on behalf of everybody here this evening, the most warm thank you to you for such a remarkable evening, which has given us so much to reflect upon and pray about indeed. Before we all leave, could I just remind people that there will be no Church and Academy next month. It's end of December. So our next meeting will be on the 28th of January. You can put that in your diaries. And our speaker on that day will be Professor Beverly Clack, who is a professor of the philosophy of religion at Oxford Brookes University. And she has just written a book and has been reflecting on theology and issues after COVID. And we hope that by then it will really be beginning to be after COVID.